Well, hello, hockey fans. Welcome back to the Hockey Writers Live. It is Thursday, May 20th, 2021 already. The regular season finally ended on Wednesday, a few games into the playoffs. Everything is just weird, but one way at a time, we'll figure something out. And hey, we got some playoff hockey going on. But you know what? Figured that there's many of you out there that are probably jealous that a lot of these teams are playing some really good series out there. These next few episodes are going to be for you because while many teams are playing in the playoffs, several teams are not. And we figure we're going to dedicate some shows to your teams to kind of recap the season that you had, but more importantly, try to get you ready for your off season and all leading up to not only Seattle coming into the league, but the draft lottery coming up on June 2nd, as well as the NHL draft itself. And to help us get started, we're going to make this an all Detroit Red Wings show. Have one of the really good writers out there who covers the Detroit Red Wings for The Athletic. It is Max Bultman joining us. Hi, Max.
Hey, Mark, how you doing? Thanks for having me.
I'm really well. Thank you. Really appreciate your time. So, yeah, I mean, the Detroit Red Wings, interesting season. They definitely had a little bit of a step up from last year, kind of expecting when you have a few veterans come on board. But just from your overall perspective, you covering the team, did they meet the expectations that you had coming in?
They did, and they might have even surpassed them a little bit. I mean, I set my prediction at 47 points, and I think they got to 48. And what actually impressed me is they did that despite a early season losing streak when they had a few guys out with COVID. I think they lost 8 in a row in like the second or third week of the season, or I guess that obviously stretches multiple weeks. But early in the season, that losing streak starts, and you're thinking, "Oh man, here it goes again." Like that was what last year was. It was losing streaks of 6, 7, 8. I think at one point it was one in double digits, and you're thinking, "Oh, it's going to be another of these." I thought after they got everyone back from COVID, I'm not gonna say they were a good team, but they were just much better. They were competitive almost every night. These losing streaks did not go more than 3 games, maybe one longer than 3. I think there was one longer than 3 the whole rest of the year. And again, that's not a really high bar, but when you think of where they were starting, it was a more resilient team. They were playing tighter games. They were in games late, and that's what allowed them to steal some games. I mean, ultimately, they won the season series with Carolina, and I think they were pretty close to doing it with Tampa. And those are two of the best teams in not just the Central Division, but the NHL. And, I think a big reason they were able to do it is because they were just a more resilient team. They defended better. They got better goaltending. Still didn't score nearly enough. And that stands out as the next item. But I think they at least met expectations, if not slightly, outperformed at least what I expected.
And being in the division this year as a Columbus writer, I watched them probably a little bit more than I normally do. At least the one thing that stood out to me as an outsider was they seemed to be better defensively. Is that something that you saw as well? That there was maybe not a significant step, but certainly steps in the right direction there.
I thought so 100%. And I think it starts with a couple of guys that they brought in the offseason. John Merrill, who I thought defensively was their best defensive defenseman until they traded him to Montreal. And I like Troy Stetcher. I like that addition. One guy who surprised me was Mark Stahl, who was a guy that, took a lot of heat in the late days of his New York Rangers career. And he's a guy that as the season wore on, I thought, did not look like the player that I had heard all of that about, when he was traded. He was, had a second round pick attached to him to arrive with the Red Wings. I thought as the year went on, Mark Stahl was better. And I'm not going to say that he was, a top 4 stud on any team in the NHL or anything like that. But, on most nights he was in the, I guess, like upper 4 of Detroit. And I realize where Detroit is and that, for a lot of teams, maybe that is your third pair guy. But I thought he still looked like an NHL defenseman. I thought Troy Stetcher, all hustle, all heart, he embodied what they wanted to do. And so I thought personnel was a big reason why. I also just thought they did it better. Even guys who were returning, they played better. Danny DeKeyser, as the year went along, went from a guy who, he was coming off back surgery, and I think it showed in the early part of the season. But by the end of the year, did he look like completely the Danny DeKeyser of old? I wouldn't say so, but much closer to it than it did in the first week or two.
Absolutely. So, Max, a lot of fans in the hockey world saw the trade, Jacob Vrana, Anthony Mantha, caught me completely off guard. I guess so. A two-part question for you: Did trading Anthony Mantha catch you off guard? And then where does Jacob Vrana fit long term with this team?
It definitely caught me off guard. I mean, ultimately, you can look in hindsight and you can say maybe it shouldn't have caught us off guard. He was healthy scratched at one point earlier in the year. But this is still the only guy Steve Yzerman had given more than 2 years of contract to as Red Wings general manager. I thought he was their best player last season, and it was not that level this year for him, which almost made it more surprising to me that they trade him, because you don't think of wanting to trade guys when they're at a relative low point, which I think, compared to where Mantha was in 2019-20, this season was. I mean, he was right about a half point per game for the Red Wings. And so, yes, I was surprised they traded him. And I was also surprised with the return that they got back. I think on the day of the trade, I felt like it was pretty even. In the 11 games after the trade, I do think Detroit came out ahead here. And I think the reason why is I maybe had underrated Jacob Vrana. My initial assessment of the trade was they get back a good scorer and the upside lies in the draft picks. What I was not giving enough credit for was that in the increased opportunity in Detroit, Jacob Vrana was a point per game player in a small sample, but he looked electric. He's so fast. His release is way better than I realized. This is a guy who I think in 17 to 18 minutes a night can pop at a level that he didn't pop at in Washington. And so I think I was not appreciating what that increased opportunity could do for Jacob Vrana. And if it does, then Detroit's going to have a really nice trade on its hands, on top of obviously the first round pick and the second round pick. And they also got, Richard Panik, who I imagine his contract played a part into him being in that deal and maybe up the return a little bit. But, you look at it and you say, if Vrana can just 1-for-1 replace Mantha's production, then it's a huge win for the Red Wings because they got the picks on top of it.
Max, what does that do for the rebuild? Is, saying everything that you just said about, especially if they win the trade, if Vrana meets expectations or even exceeds them, are we still talking about a few years away realistically, or has the process been a little bit expedited?
I don't think it accelerated because you take out Mantha and you bring in a player who's about the same age, right? So, and if we're saying that they're going to be similar in quality, I mean, if Vrana becomes, a 40 goal scorer, then yeah, it accelerates your rebuild because you got a 40 goal scorer. But I don't expect that to happen. I think you're hoping he's a 30 goal scorer. And that's about what I think you were hoping Anthony Mantha was before he gets traded. So I don't think it accelerates it, but I do think it gives more ammo, right? It gives those picks, that first round pick, that second round pick. Those guys are going to take time. I mean, a pick in the 20s, like the Washington pick is going to be, if not 30s, by the way, exactly. is going to take, probably 3 years minimum to make it to the NHL. So by that point, if things are going well for the Red Wings rebuild, you'd think that's the very end of it. And so I don't think that pick factors into the timeline, but it does give you options. I mean, I suppose if you wanted, you could trade that pick now. You could flip that pick for now talent at a 24, 25-year-old, 23-year-old, whatever that may be. You could do that, and maybe that accelerates it. But this trade alone, I don't think accelerates it. It just gives more, more cracks at the dartboard that is the draft lottery, and a new player who I think there is upside with Vrana, no doubt, and certainly more now than ever.
Yeah. Max Bultman, who writes for The Athletic, covers the Detroit Red Wings, joining us here on the Hockey Writers Live. Just a few more for him. So obviously the big story that just came out, besides having the availability, was they decided to bring Coach Jeff Blashill back. I was looking at Twitter, don't ever read the comments, but I did, and it seemed like a lot of fans were upset at this. What do you make of the decision to bring him back? Is it something that, he's good with the young players? Has he earned this opportunity? Just try and make sense of this for us.
Yeah, I mean, I expected this to happen, right? Like, I think that, the way that Steve Yzerman has always spoken about Jeff Blashill, and I know sometimes you have to, be a little skeptical of the way that GMs talk about their coaches, but it's every indication has always been that he likes the job Jeff Blashill's done, right? Like the Red Wings, like we just talked about, they took the step forward this year. No, they were not starting from a great spot. And yes, Jeff Blashill was the coach of that team last year too. That was really bad, but they bounced back, right? Like they got more resilient. Steve Yzerman talked about how he was glad with the way that Jeff handled the younger players, both being patient with them and giving them some opportunities, but not handing those opportunities, making them really earn it. And I think that when he brings something like that up, I think that means something, that like that's part of his decision making. He also talked about how the team needs better players. And I think I'm going to paraphrase the comment, but he said something like, I can change the coach year after year after year, and if the players aren't better, nothing's going to change. I thought that was a very telling quote, a very revealing quote. I think he looks at this and says, Jeff Blashill was not the reason the Red Wings are not a good team. Ultimately, is Jeff Blashill going to be the coach of this team when they're a contender? I still don't know the answer to that question, but I do think this is a vote of confidence from Steve Yzerman that Jeff Blashill is the right coach to continue shepherding this phase of the rebuild.
Okay, perfect. So now the fun stuff. So, the offseason, obviously every team has a lot of questions. Detroit is right up there, looking at having a top draft pick. Maybe they'll get lucky and win the lottery. Some really interesting young players on the way. Do you feel like that they're to a point where they can start to make a lot of trades here? Or like what kinds of things are you expecting this offseason?
I don't know if anyone knows what to expect this offseason because no one yet knows what the player movement around the expansion draft is going to be like. I think I would expect if you wanted to put it on a kind of a sliding scale of very conservative to very aggressive, I think I'd still put it more in the conservative column. But I'd have said that at the trade deadline too when he went and traded Anthony Mantha. So a lot depends on what's out there, what opportunities there are. I don't think he's going to try to push the pedal to the floor and get this thing off the ground and this team into the playoffs next year at all costs. I don't think that's his number one aim. But, around the expansion draft, let's say that there's a team that doesn't think it's going to be able to protect a good young player who fits their age group. If that player is on the open market, would it stun me to see Steve Yzerman make a trade for a player who's 24, 25, 26? Absolutely not. So I think it's certainly possible. And he's indicated that he's, in his move so far that he's done stuff like that. He went out and traded for Robbie Fabry. He went out and got Jacob Vrana in the Anthony Mantha deal. I think they want this team to be competitive. I just don't see them selling out at all costs to make it happen immediately. I think they still want to follow a process, be patient as they do this.
There's three players, Max, that I'm very curious in terms of what we could possibly see in the near future. The first one played a little bit in Grand Rapids, played some games with the Red Wings late, and that's Joe Vellano. What were your initial impressions of seeing him, early on here, especially with his debut?
Good. I mean, I thought he looked like he belonged. Yeah, he scores the goal, and that's the nice thing. But you looked at the way that he was playing, causing some problems. He had a nice stick lift on one of his very first shifts. I think this was against Columbus to force a turnover, and he was creating danger for the Red Wings. He didn't look like he was being irresponsible. And it's always something that the Red Wings prioritizes 200-foot play. Well, they gave positive reviews about his 200-foot play, and I think as a young player, that's a big criteria for them, especially when we talk about, them not handing roles over to young players for nothing, making them earn it. I think the 200-foot game is one of the main areas of that. I know that can be frustrating to fans when they look at the Red Wings scoring. I don't know. I think it was 2.23 points per goals per game, right? That's brutal. You're not going to win consistently with that kind of output. I think what they see is you got to have the baseline as the defense. You're not going to sell out to get that number up. And then once you have that baseline, then you can build and you can try to create more goals within that. And so I think that's how they see it. And do they have to add more to make that happen as opposed to just internal regression? My answer would probably be yes, but I think they also want to see what happens if they can get a little better puck luck out of, Dylan Larkin's shooting percentage. I think this year was, if not the lowest of his career, one of the lowest, well below his career average. Can they get Tyler Bertuzzi and Robbie Fabry healthy? That's some goal scoring. Philip Zadina, as he continues to progress. Can that be some more goal scoring? You add in a Joe Vellano. Can he do it? Yep. So I think, anyway, you know what I mean? I think Joe Vellano was good is the answer to my question. I think one big question you have now is he going to score?
Absolutely. Mo Seider, does he start on the blue line next year?
Yeah, I think no doubt. He was the SHL Defenseman of the Year. Physical from everything that I could see. Doesn't look like he's going to be intimidated at all by the NHL. And based on the results that he got over there, I think he's not just going to start in the NHL. I think he's going to make a quick impact for them next year.
Can't wait to see him. A lot of people question that pick, but it's going to be a stud. And the last one I want to ask you about, how far are we from the Lucas Raymond experience?
A little farther than with Seider would be my guess. I mean, I think they'll give him the shot to win a job if he can in training camp, but my guess would be that doesn't happen. Raymond was injured obviously at the end of this year, so that takes some valuable reps away from him as he tries to make that run. But look, I don't think they want to rush anything here. You look at their last couple of of high picks, right? And it is Zadina 2 years ago or 3 years ago now. Wow, time's moving fast.
Wow.
And they gave him a few games at the end of his first season, but he still started the next year in Grand Rapids, and I don't think he came up until close to Christmas, and that was the result of an injury. And then he carves his place out. Then you look at Seider. Well, would Seider have been in the NHL this year? Had the pandemic not happened? Quite possibly. But he wanted to play sooner, so he goes over to Europe and he plays there. That's 2 years since his draft that it's been, and he hasn't made his debut. They're going to not rush these guys at all. I wouldn't expect Lucas Raymond to be any different. Can you see him next year? At some point. I bet it's not on opening night.
Okay. So 2 more for you. The Seattle experience. We're getting ready for that expansion draft coming up. I think Detroit's in a pretty good spot, but do you have an idea who might be in play for the Kraken?
You know what? I'm more confused about it now than I was before the end of season press conference. I thought I had a very good handle, and then Steve Yzerman made some comments that I might be reading too much into about, Gustav Lindstrom and Dennis Cholowski and seeing them on the team next year. Giovanni Smith as well. My initial inclination would have been some of the guys who are available are Evgeny Svechnikov, Giovanni Smith, and one of those 2 young defensemen I just mentioned, Cholowski and Lindstrom. I now wonder if there is more of a chance than I was giving credit for Smith to be protected, for both of Cholowski and Lindstrom to be protected, which could mean Nemesnikov and Troy Stetcher are available. I'm not sure where I've come down on that yet. I want to give it a couple of days to kind of marinate in my mind and see what I think the thing is. Maybe see if I can poke around a little bit more. I have less of a handle on it now than I felt like I did 2 days ago, though. And I don't think Steve Yzerman's probably bothered by that.
Yeah. If we're left guessing, I think maybe he's doing his job at this point. But
that's right.
So last one for you, Max. I know there was a little bit of a delay, but finally the Red Wings had their end of season availability. Just any sort of major takeaways or what you heard from the team, and maybe a thought as to why they waited as long as they did before they did their availability.
I don't have an answer for that, unfortunately, but ultimately it's not the most consequential thing in the world. They got their business done.
Yep.
They extended their coach. They announced that, 2 hours before they have the press conference, and then they get their business done.
Perfect. Well, this has been wonderful. Fans, make sure you follow Max. Does wonderful work with the Athletic covering the Red Wings at @M_Bultman. I know he has a podcast that he does with one of our former colleagues here at the Hockey Writers with Iyer. He's a real awesome guy. They do great work there. Max, we really appreciate your time today. Thank you for joining us in Hockey Writers Live, getting us all right for the Red Wings.
Hey, thanks so much for having me, guys. Take care.
Yeah, you too. And fans, stay tuned. We're going to have our Red Wings panel. We'll keep this whole Red Wings thing going. Well, fans, welcome back to part 2 of the Hockey Writers Live, May 20th, 2021 already. We really appreciate the Athletics' Max Bultman joining us to talk about the Red Wings. And I figure, we're going to continue this experience, and we're going to bring in our grind line. Got 3 of the very best of our writers here who cover the Detroit Red Wings for the Hockey Writers. And again, make sure you don't miss any of these interviews. Hit that like button on Facebook. Make sure you hit subscribe on YouTube. You will not miss any of our panels. You will not miss any of our guests. And I promise you, these panels are going to get better, and the guests are going to get better as well as we move forward. We're going to have general managers. We're going to have players coming on board. So just make sure you do not miss a thing moving forward. But for now, let us introduce the grind line to you. And these 3 cover the Detroit Red Wings expertly well here with the Hockey Writers. So let's bring them in. Pat Brown is joining us. Hi, Pat.
Hi, Mark. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Appreciate you joining us as well. And Kyle Knopp is joining us, who started off with Tampa Bay, now covers the Red Wings. Hi, Kyle.
Hey, Mark. Long-time listener. Happy to be here.
I really appreciate you taking the time to join us. And finally, last and certainly not least, Devin Little joining us. Hi, Devin.
Hi, Mark. Happy to see you. Happy to be here with my teammates.
Happy to see you, and great that 3 of you joining us here. So, yeah, a lot to talk about with the Red Wings here. Let's just jump right into this. Pat, we're going to start with you. I don't know, me being an outsider, I got to watch the Red Wings a little bit more this year with them being in Columbus as a division. I walked away impressed. I know they didn't have a great season. I know they had trouble scoring. But overall, any sort of expectations I had about them, not only did I think that they were met, I thought they were even a little bit exceeded. Do you feel like that the Red Wings met any of your expectations this year?
Yeah, I'd say hands down expectations were met. We joked in our show or before the season started, but a potential playoff run. But let's be honest, there were no expectations of that heading into the season. Max had actually mentioned that 8-game losing streak. And that really kind of derailed the season, to be honest, because the Wings started out playing 500 hockey. And they split their first 2 series. It looked good. They went on to Chicago. Everybody kind of expected Detroit to roll Chicago based on how they started against Tampa. And that didn't happen. Chicago dominated Detroit and the wheels kind of fell off, but they got it back. And it was nice to see them not panic. It was nice to see after that 8-game losing streak, almost playing 500 hockey the rest of the way out. And I would say they absolutely 100%, at least minimally, met expectations this season.
Well, Kyle, did they meet your expectations?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we knew that coming into the season, it was going to be tough. Detroit was one of 2 teams in the brand new Central Division that didn't at least get invited to the playoff bubble last year. So they're already up against really good competition coming into the season. And they were able to put up more wins this year in fewer games than they did last year. So that definitely is something to hang your hat on to walk away from the season. And I think that, in total, they definitely looked a lot better.
All right, Devin, give you the final word on expectations.
Yeah, so just kind of echoing what everybody else has said, I do think they met, if not exceeded, expectations. I think that the overall improvement by the team was observable especially in the defensive end. I think you and Max touched on their overall defensive growth, and I think they cut down their goals against rate by over half a goal, which is impressive. And I think that's a testament to just the team's willingness to buy in and play a style that gives them a chance to win. And the record reflects it.
All right. Well, Kyle, we'll start with you on this next one. And I think everybody saw the news that Jeff Blashill is, in fact, coming back to be the head coach of the Detroit Red Wings. And they say never read the comment section, but I did. And there's overwhelming negativity over this. So I'm going to give you guys a chance to kind of set the record straight here. Just kind of maybe what were the Red Wings thinking bringing Jeff Blashill back? And then why do you think there's such negativity around him, especially given that the town hasn't exactly been there, and I'm not sure you can pin all of the blame on him. So kind of give the good and the bad with Jeff Blashill, Kyle.
Yeah. So, obviously I've written on it a few times this year. I thought that the team would have been better moving forward in a different direction behind the bench this year. For me, it was more from the fan perspective. The staleness of the team or the lack of creativity on the offensive side of the puck just seemed to really kind of put a damper on our progression. And, he's been with the team for 6 years. He was with the team as an assistant before he went as a head coach to Grand Rapids. And he really has been around these players the last, I think, 10 plus years to be a developmental presence in their game. And I just haven't seen it as a fan. As a hockey person, it makes sense. You're bringing back a coach in the middle of a rebuild. You're not shaking anything up. Most of your team knows his system. He's done a great job in the defensive side of the ice to really, like Devin said, cut down our goals against per game and really make the team more accountable in their own zone, which is huge. So I see that in the hockey side that right now we're in the spot in our rebuild that it doesn't make sense to bring anyone else back. So that makes sense why they are bringing him back.
All right, Devin, what do you think of Jeff Blashill? Did it catch you by surprise, or what do you have to add?
So it did not catch me by surprise, even down to the reported details of the deal. It's right in line with what I expected for him. At Yzerman's press conference yesterday, when he discussed the team and Blashill and all that good stuff, he really kind of kept going back to his working relationship with Blashill and how back and forth of a relationship they have. They clearly seem to enjoy working with each other, and I think that that's valuable for a general manager who's still trying to put his stamp on the roster. And then also, I think that there is something to Yzerman mentioning that he could change coaches a dozen different times. And it still wouldn't matter if the good players aren't there. I think that to me reveals that Yzerman, in the grand scheme of the chicken and egg thing, what comes first, a good coach or a good team? Yzerman believes that a good team needs to come first. So he's putting it on himself to assemble a good team. And then once he has the pieces in place that he likes, that's when it's kind of judgment time for Jeff Blashill. So for the fans out there that are not happy right now, I would say give it more time. I know it's hard to do, but the time is coming where Judgment Day will arrive. And the best case scenario for everybody is that Jeff Blashill makes a believer out of everyone, right?
Go. And Pat, you get the last word on Jeff Blashill.
Yeah, look, fans want to win, right? And fans want to win now. And even though when you're staring down the barrel of a rebuild and you know it's going to take a while, as a fan, you still want to win now. You want a coach who's got that King Midas touch, like Gallant came in with Vegas and took them to the final their very first year in the league. You know, you want that type, and that's just not the situation here. And what Yzerman did to bring Blashill back on a reported 2-year deal makes sense. Who else are you going to bring in? You're not going to bring anybody else in right now with a team that's in flux, that you got a lot of youth rolling in. Blashill is the right person, at least for next year, for the immediate future. And I was one of his harshest critics during that 8-game losing streak earlier this year. But hands down, there's nobody else to bring in right now. He's the guy. They got rid of Bilesma, which made sense because special teams, the power play was just atrocious. But Blashill is the guy. It was the right move, and we'll see how it shakes out.
Okay. All right, Devin, we're going to start with you with the next one here. And I think this is a question that a lot of fans certainly have out there, especially when you look at the Red Wings. They made the playoffs for what seemed like a million years in a row. And now they haven't made in quite a while, kind of as expected. But how much longer do fans have to wait? So in other words, what is the status of the rebuild in your mind? And how far away realistically are they from legitimately at least trying to go for a wild card spot, if nothing else?
So it was 2 million years in a row, actually, but I'm kidding. No. So whenever this question gets asked of me, how far away do I think the Red Wings are going into the season? I like to lean on a timeline of 3 to 5 years. 3 being super optimistic, everything goes right, and that's when they're like a playoff team. I'm not talking Stanley Cup. I'm talking playoffs at that point. 5 years is my more realistic, because things are going to go wrong. Things aren't going to go according to plan. 5 years is kind of my timeline. Well, that was a year ago. So I guess now I have to move the timeline up a year, right? So 2 to 4 years. I think that Yzerman said something along the lines of, it wouldn't interest him to go out and acquire players that wouldn't be there with the team in 4 or 5 years. And I think that's a really revealing statement, because I think that 4 or 5 year window is kind of what he's aiming for. I think the rebuild is right on track. I've written about it. I know that, we're years into this thing now, where we've, like Pat said, it's been a while without the playoffs, but these things take time. And when the time comes, it's going to be, look at the Tampa Bay Lightning. There's your proof of what's to come.
All right, Pat, what do you have to say about the status of the rebuild and how far away you think they are?
Yeah, things are on track for sure. I think the Wings may contend for a wild card spot in 2022-23. So season after next, which really, Devin, falls in line with the timeline you were talking about, assuming the clock started, a year or two ago. I think they compete well in a couple of years. I think next year maybe they hover around that 500 potentially. But they're a couple of years away from being a serious playoff contender, and even a year or two beyond that from being a serious cup contender. And I think that's what I dread the most. Is I want nothing more, obviously, like fans, to see a competitive playoff-driven team. But then the stress and the, seeing every good team goes through its struggles, goes through a learning experience of how to lose before they win, almost always. You look at the Blackhawks in 2009, you look at the Penguins in 2008, and so on and so forth. You've got a lot of teams that go through that losing, and I think that's what I'm dreading more than anything. But to be at that level, they're a couple of years away.
All right, Kyle, you get the last word on how far you think the Red Wings are away.
Yeah, so I think to make an actual push at the playoffs, I think the 3 to 4 years is probably accurate. Next year, I think it'll kind of depend on what the new or old realignment of the divisions look like, and how, Detroit ends up stacking up against, if we get Toronto and Montreal back, those types of teams that are tough to play against. That will definitely have some effect on our standings at the end of the year. And then, if we can continue to progress, in 2 years, I could see us kind of making that push toward the end of the season, maybe just falling short a couple of games. And then in 3 years, really kind of being, at that 5-6 spot in the East. So I think realistically, we're 3 to 4 years away from a playoff berth. But, it's going to be a fun ride. So I'm excited.
All right, in case you're just joining us here, it's the Hockey Writers Live for May 20th, 2021. And we have our Red Wings panel, the Grind Line, Pat Brown, Kyle Knopp, and Devin Little joining us here. Just got a couple more questions for the crew. So, Pat, we're going to go back to you here, and I'm going to ask you guys to put your Steve Yzerman caps on for a minute, because it's an interesting offseason. If you listen to what Max had to say, he was completely caught off guard by the Anthony Mantha trade. And, on one hand, you can think, okay, well, maybe they're right where they need to be, where they don't have to make any major moves. But then on the other hand, there might be some opportunities out there, especially if they have cap space, if they have to help out a team, especially if there's Seattle implications. So there's a kind of a wide range of variety of outcomes that are out there. Pat, my question for you is, do you expect it to be busy in the sense of trades for the Red Wings? And is there anybody that they could realistically target? Or do you feel like that it's going to be more conservative?
I definitely think it's more conservative at this point. I don't think there's a lot of pieces they want to move unless an offer jumps off the table, like it did with Mantha, obviously. And it was a good trade for both teams for sure. But I just don't see a flurry of activity, because right now it's all about developing that pipeline. You've got a lot of players overseas. Mark, you talked with Max earlier. Seider's going to be coming over for sure next year, and we'll be starting probably on the blue line. And you've got a lot of these players that you want to, that you really want to bring up and train the right way and get into the swing of things. And I don't think there are too many pieces at this point you want to move. Maybe there's a couple where they can move up in the draft or, something like that. But overall, I just don't see a terribly busy offseason or busy trades. But I'm interested to hear what Kyle and Devin have to say.
Well, Kyle, it's your turn.
Yeah, so, I'm going to lean more on the conservative side this year. Again, I think with the expansion draft, if there are some teams that are looking to kind of circumvent that by moving another player that they can't quite protect in order to protect someone else, Yzerman has the cap space to be able to make types of moves and really kind of finagle something like that. So I could see one or two what we might consider big moves right now, but maybe down the road they don't seem that big. But one or two kind of happening this offseason in terms of trades. For free agents, I definitely see a lot more action there than in the trade market.
And Devin, you get the final word for now on possible trades.
So like Kyle, I think that we could see smaller deals potentially. I think my biggest thing is I expect them to maybe do something like what they did with Mark Stahl this year, where they bring on an ugly contract with some draft compensation. And then, like Max alluded to, I think that there's going to be an opportunity to maybe snag somebody around the expansion draft. And maybe even that's how they go about adding an ugly contract, is just to help somebody with their expansion protection list. So I think that Yzerman will be aggressive in the sense that he'll be looking to make moves and seeing what's out there. Will any of these things come to fruition? I mean, you never know. I think Yzerman's kind of a real wild card, and that makes him kind of a fun general manager to have in town. But you never know.
That's just it. You don't know. And the thing that keeps jumping out at me, you guys alluded to it a little bit, the draft compensation. And if the right opportunity comes around, get as many darts for the dartboard as you can, because you have a better chance of finding something that sticks. So that's That's what I'll be watching for, especially around Seattle. I think there's opportunity, maybe an extra second, maybe an extra third, maybe even a first round pick in certain cases, depending on trade up or down or whatnot. That's where I'm going to be focused on with the Red Wings. So another question. We'll go to the next one. Kyle, we'll start with you. Just off season wise, we talked about trades. So what is the one storyline that you're going to have your eyes on the most when it comes to the Red Wings?
Yeah, so I mean, there's quite a few interesting storylines that are out there, but I think the one I'm most interested right now is Blashill and Yzerman just came out and said that they really want Larkin to be a true second line center and worry about the defensive side of his game. And, you know, we had a couple comments on our show last week asking about Larkin's, as a first line center, and we're going to touch on more on that in our show this week. But I think if they're really making him that defensive specialist, they need to come out and find a first line center in the offseason. And I think that's going to have to be through free agency or maybe one of those trades that we alluded to that we can't quite see right now. But so I think that for me is the biggest storyline heading into this offseason is how are we going to bolster that first line?
All right, Devin, what's your biggest storyline?
First of all, a heck of a plug for the next show, Kyle. Kudos to you. Second, my big thing that I'm looking forward to seeing is just how many people Yzerman brings in, because as it is, there's an opportunity to really sprinkle in some youth into next season's lineup. We talk about Sider. He seems like a pretty safe bet to join the team. But, you know, what about Joe Vellano? Does he maybe get a real shot to stick next season? If they bring in enough veteran guys, he's probably not going to. Michael Rasmussen kind of laid claim to a spot in the roster. And if they bring in too many guys, he might be on the outside looking in. I remember during this past off season, they brought in a few too many forwards where I was like, oh, so maybe this guy isn't going to play. Interesting. And maybe a few too many defensemen. So I'm curious if they still go, if Yzerman goes with that approach of just bringing in as many veterans as he feels necessary, or if he's going to allow some leeway for some kids to really start laying claim to this roster.
All right, Pat, you get the last word on the one storyline that you're going to watch.
Well, you know, aside from having some angst around the expansion draft and wondering how that's going to play out, I would say, and I hate to center it around one person, but I am really curious to see what plays out with Tyler Bertuzzi, because Yzerman brought him back on a 1-year deal. Reasonable. I went to arbitration, reasonable for both. And then Bertuzzi plays 9 games, plays very well, by the way, 5 goals in 9 games. And that's it. Done for the season. So there's not a whole lot to go off of with that contract, especially considering what he was awarded last year, which was a 1-year show me. There was speculation, assuming he had the type of year everybody thought, that he was going to get his long-term deal. He was due for his long-term deal now, but I don't necessarily know if that's the case because he hasn't played almost an entire season. So I'm going to be really curious to see how that plays out between Yzerman and Bertuzzi and where that whole thing ends up this offseason.
All right, I got one more question for you guys, and it's going to be a little bit of a surprise. Last regular season game of the year, right, was on Wednesday, the Canucks and the Flames.
Yep.
The tank talk, and you know that the Red Wings were involved with that, especially at the end with the Columbus Blue Jackets. Devin, I'll start with you. I'm just curious about the overall thoughts and tank, because you know that teams are going to admit that they're trying to win their games. Do you feel like that they should have tried their best to improve their draft position? I guess, where do the three of you just stand on that topic of tanking?
So last season, it was really easy to embrace the tank considering the team was out of the playoffs by January. And I think in those special scenarios, I think all you have to look forward to is potentially getting a top pick. And then, as we all know, they still got the 4th overall pick. So in my opinion, when you can completely tank your season and still pick outside the top 3, which obviously the rules have changed now, it's not worth it to me. I think that you learn more and you develop more as a player by playing winning hockey. Draft position be damned. I'm very proud of what the Red Wings did this season. I realize that it hurt their draft odds in the long run, but I think that they learned a lot more and developed more as a team this season than they did last season, even though they're theoretically going to pick higher last season than they did this season.
All right, Pat, what do you say?
I say it depends. How deep is the draft?
Yeah.
If you have a generational player, if you have a Bedard coming up ready, there may be a little more incentive, and it might be a little more understandable if maybe you just watch that puck. No, seriously. Look, everybody knows it's a hot topic. I think it would be unrealistic to think teams don't. I think there are effective ways of doing it without throwing the game. I think there are effective ways of getting your kids more NHL level experience, things like that. Putting an effective product still on the ice, but maybe coming up a little bit short. I would be naive to think otherwise, I think. And again, who is that number one overall pick? How many generational talents are there for you to potentially latch onto? That may play a little bit of a role in that decision.
And Kyle, you get the final word of the night on the tank.
So my understanding or my mentality with the tank mentality, I guess we'll go with, is that anytime you're trying to have your team purposefully lose, you are creating a negative atmosphere and a negative, just a base to build your team around. And it's really important to have that, not only going into the off season and into the next season, but to have that, to lay that groundwork to build from. And if you're going into every game, your team's expecting to lose, your team doesn't care. It's very apathetic. Your coaching staff isn't really doing anything to adjust to game plans or to prepare their team. It's not something you want in an organizational and the mindset. You can't live off of that. And so it just really puts your team at a really big disadvantage for future generations, because the next year you're going to have these young guys come in from the draft, from training camp, and the mentality for the last 3 months of the last season was, hey, we're here to collect a paycheck and get off the ice uninjured. And if you're teaching young kids that, from their first couple days in the organization, then down the road, it's just always going to be there. And I think that's just a cancer that continues to develop within organizations. Like Pat said, do I think it happens when there's generational talents on the line and there's, maybe 2-3 games left in the season? And if you lose all 3 of those games, you get the first pick or a much better chance at it. Yeah, maybe you're playing a 60% AHL team that game. But I think as an overall mentality, it does way more harm than it does good.
And you know what? I agree with you all. And in fact, if you saw the release that came out with the NHL draft lottery, the odds actually went down because there's a 16th team. So they actually bumped it down some. 5 out of every 6 lotteries, you're not going to win. And that's if you're the worst team.
Yeah.
So to intentionally do that, you're right. Environmentally wise, numbers wise, it doesn't make sense. You have to have a little bit of luck, to jump up. And at that point, make sure you have your habits right. So Pat, Kyle, Devin, the grind line, really good stuff. We really appreciate you taking the time to join us in the Hockey Writers Live to educate us on the Detroit Red Wings.
Thanks, Mark.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thanks, guys. So fans, next week, we'll have another panel. We'll have another team. Again, we're going to focus on the teams that are not in the playoffs, because I know you're out there, you're bored, you're jealous of everybody else playing out there. We're going to get the fix for you. We're going to have a New Jersey Devils panel and guests coming up. I think we're going to find one for Anaheim. We're going to have one for Columbus. We're going to try and get as many as we can leading up to that NHL draft. So stick with us here. Thank you for joining us. Hope you all have a great night. Have a great weekend. We'll see you back here on the Hockey Writers Live. Take care.
Thanks.